This is Douglas Edwards. President Kennedy tonight ordered a 1,500-man increase in the American garrison in West Berlin. The troops will reach Berlin on Sunday. Here is the text of the official statement as released by Presidential News Secretary Pierre Salinger. Quote, "In view of recent developments, including the movement of East German military forces into East Berlin, the President has directed an appropriate increase in the United States garrison in Berlin. A battle group of approximately 1,500 men will proceed by way of the Helmstedt-Berlin Autobahn, arriving there on Sunday." End of quotation. Vice President Lyndon Johnson is flying from Washington en route to Berlin tonight. CBS News now presents a special report on the Berlin crisis.
Special report is presented by Polaroid Corporation, makers of the Polaroid Land Camera.
I am Daniel Shore, and this is Divided Berlin. Today, truly and brutally divided.
It is the world that really divides here, but for the moment, the language and the symbols are all in German. Behind me is the Brandenburg Gate, an ornamental monument built by an insignificant emperor to pretty up Berlin. It is not pretty today. But Brandenburg Gate has been sealed with men in iron, not so much to keep people out as to keep people in. And from here, since before dawn last Sunday, a ring has grown around the 25-mile perimeter of West Berlin. A ring of barbed wire and barricades at Potsdam Square and torn-up streets and tanks and a severed subway and elevated system. A ring around West Berlin to turn East Berlin into a concentration camp. And while we Americans, we British, we French, while we are still in West Berlin, the Soviets say that this is also by grace of Soviet arms. We of the West say, we are here by legal right and by the right of being equally victors in World War II. Today we must defend, or try to as best we can, the commitment that this will be one city. Later, we may have to defend our right to be in this city at all, and to reach here from 110 miles away. But we say, we will defend the freedom of West Berlin. We guarantee West Berlin by all means, not short of war.
I'm Charles Collingwood, and this is the Autobahn outside Helmstedt, Germany. We're 110 miles from Berlin and the tense and tragic situation there. It seems normal enough here, but this is the place, rather than Berlin itself, where, according to some people, World War III could begin. Let me show you where we are. This is Germany. All Germany is divided into three parts. Part one, the West German Republic, about 53 million people on our side of the Iron Curtain. Part two, East Germany, Soviet Germany, the German Democratic Republic. Nobody's quite sure of the name. About 16 million people on the other side of the Iron Curtain. Part 3, Berlin, divided into two. West Berlin, allied with the West. East Berlin, capital of the Soviet zone. Berlin is 110 miles deep in the Soviet zone. All air traffic to Berlin must fly along these three air corridors. Everything on wheels comes through communist-controlled territories and is checked by the East Germans and the Russians. We're here at Helmstedt. Helmstedt is one of those checkpoints. This is the West checkpoint. Passports, manifests, and identification papers are scanned. Also, there's a little man jotting down license plates of all vehicles going to Berlin. These license plates are sent ahead and checked against the vehicles coming into the city. That's to see that everybody gets through. 100 yards down the road is the Soviet checkpoint. Those are East German guards checking the papers of civilians. Russian soldiers look over the papers of all military personnel and vehicles. The Berlin crisis is complicated, but at Helmstedt its outlines are clear. The Russians say that before the end of the year, they're going to sign a separate peace treaty with the East Germans. Then the Russians will disappear from Helmstedt. The East German officials will take over and stamp the papers. And the East Germans say they'll decide who can go up this road to Berlin. They're implying that they'll deny access to the city as they see fit. They claim the right to deny access not only to German civilians, but to the Allied military. Now, the West isn't going to stand for that. We claim many things, but primarily, because we won the war, we claim we can push anything we want down this highway to Berlin. Cabbages, coal, or cannons, legally. The Soviets can't stop us now, and certainly the East Germans won't have the right to stop us later. Walter Ulbricht, head of the East Germans, says that as soon as he has complete control of that checkpoint, he'll decide who goes to Berlin and who doesn't. If Ulbricht stops us at Helmstedt, there's going to be trouble. Every government in the West, whatever other disagreements they may have on this Berlin crisis, agrees on one point. If they deny us access to Berlin, we're going through anyway, by one means or another, and not short of war. We're going through not only for legal or historic reasons, but because we have 2.5 million people in Berlin whose freedom is our responsibility. 110 miles up this road lies West Berlin, an island of freedom surrounded by a sea of communism. That's what the West says. A bone in our throat, says Khrushchev. A cancer that must be removed, echoes Ulbricht.
Hello, my name is Alan Miller, and I'm here to make a demonstration that I think you'll find very interesting. Here in this box is a brand new Polaroid land camera. Now this is the 10-second automatic model, exactly as it comes from your store. And I'm going to take a picture without making a single setting. But first, let's load our camera. This is a very simple process. Film in the back, the tab pulled over, the camera shut, and we're all ready to roll. Now, so far, I haven't made a single setting, and I'm not about to. All I do is pull the camera forward, lift the viewfinder, and I'm all ready to take a picture. Let me show you just how simple that can be. Now, Gretchen, would you give me a nice big smile, please? 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much. Now, in just 10 seconds, we'll see our finished picture. And as you saw, I didn't set for exposure or for focus. All I did was push 3 buttons numbered 1, 2, 3. Let's see how our picture turned out. Well, very well. Perfectly sharp and beautifully exposed. Now, let me show you how this camera operates. The electric eye here automatically reads the light and sets the correct exposure by varying the shutter speed up to 1/1000th of a second to catch fast action. And you never have to focus this camera because it's always in focus from 4.5 feet to miles away. You can even shoot as close as 30 inches by pulling this portrait fixture forward, like this. The new Polaroid 10-second automatic camera costs less than $95, and there are no accessories to buy. Everything is built right in, even this tiny flash gun. Why not see your dealer for a personal demonstration?
How did this border get placed here? How serious is the crisis? What made the division of Germany? Both East and West agree that the Berlin crisis is the focal point of the Cold War. So much has been written about Germany, so many statesmen, journalists, generals, and commentators on both sides have made so many comments that it would take a lifetime merely to read the documents. But it can be simplified. With all the dangers that come from oversimplification of great issues, the history of the Berlin crisis must be studied, in particular the Soviet argument. We've tried to unscramble what they seem to have been saying. And if this were a discussion over a drink between the East and the West, the conversation might sound like this. In 1945, the Western Allies destroyed all major German resistance in the West and drove into Germany. Berlin lay open, and the British pleaded with the Americans to take the city. But the Americans decided against capturing Berlin. There was the danger of a head-on collision with the Soviet army. Additionally, we counted wrong. We thought there was another German army to the south and went charging off looking for it. It wasn't there. But we could have taken Berlin.
Whether you could have taken it or not is not important. We took it. The Red Army came 1,000 miles from Moscow to Berlin. The Soviet Union took Berlin. It was our sacrifice and our victory.
On April 25th, the 1st Ukrainian Army and the 1st United States Army met at the River Elbe. Then the leaders met at Potsdam to decide what would be done with post-war Germany.
I'm interested to see what you think we decided at Potsdam.
We'd already decided on the occupation zones. We agreed that Germany was never to rise again as a military power.
Yes, I remind you, never again was there to be a German army.
It was also decided that post-war Germany was to be treated as a single economic unit.
That was the first agreement you violated. But go on.
We also agreed that Russia had suffered the most damages and was to take money and goods out of Germany as compensation. But the amount wasn't agreed on. Also left vague was just where Germany's eastern border was to be. We were going to decide that later when we had a peace treaty with a unified Germany. But the Soviet mind was already made up. You were going to do a little land grabbing. We agreed that half of East Prussia would go permanently to Russia. The southern half, plus the German provinces on the eastern side of the Oder and Nisa rivers, were to be placed under Polish administration. This was not intended as permanent. It was temporary until the peace treaty with a unified Germany was signed. Your Soviet occupation zone was to be here. But then the Soviets, all by themselves, decided that the Poles would not only administer their territory, but would have it permanently. Nobody agreed to making the Oder-Nisa line permanent. You just did it.
Everybody agrees that Potsdam was vague.
It wasn't that vague. One of the things agreed to was that the Soviets were to leave enough to enable the German people to exist without external assistance. The Soviets started carting things off wholesale.
There were a lot of hungry Russians at this time, and a lot of bombed-out Russian factories.
We helped you dismantle and destroy heavy German industry, but you had agreed in exchange for factories that you'd send in enough food to help feed the Germans, and you didn't.
I just told you, there were a lot of hungry Russians, too.
You took advantage of hunger. Nobody's mind is free on less than 1,000 calories a day. In your zone of occupation, you saw to it that people who played ball with communism got enough to eat. And you never delivered the food you'd promised to the Western zones.
And what did the West do?
We had to feed these people. So the British and Americans allied their zones.
Violation of Potsdam. Germany was to remain a single economic unit.
Churchill, who is no lover of the Germans, put it very well. He said he saw no reason why the West should chain itself to the German corpse. If we could help these people feed themselves, the American and the British taxpayer wouldn't have to pay the cost.
Your concern for the American taxpayer is remarkable. But in any case, by uniting your zones, you made two Germanys. Two Germanys are a fact. If you'd recognize this fact legally, there'd be no Berlin crisis today. Let's talk about Berlin. West and East had both agreed that Berlin was to be governed by all four powers. Americans, British, French, and Soviets. Each had one vote on the governing board, the Kommandatura. We were still trying to cooperate with you.
Unfortunately for the Soviets, the Kommandatura called for a free election of city officials, and the communists got slaughtered at the polls. That was the last time the Soviets gave the East Germans a free vote.
What would you expect? This city had been the headquarters of Nazi Germany. Naturally, these old Berliners would prefer the right to the left.
Everybody saw that Berlin had to be rebuilt. And it wasn't just a question of bricks and mortar. The Soviets had been printing German currency whenever they needed it. Nobody wanted the German mark. The city would be a vast heap of ruins and a vast black market until the currency was reformed. We had introduced currency reforms into West Germany. Now we would introduce them into West Berlin. Without stable money, there could not be a stable Germany.
You were tying West Berlin to West Germany. Creeping capitalism. That did it. We Soviets walked out of the Kommandatura. Berlin is 110 miles deep in the Soviet zone, and the West won't realize it. It's in our socialist sea, but you were treating it as a capitalist island with your currency reforms and your rebuilding. They're just disguises for subverting socialism. So we decided to show you just where Berlin was, inside Soviet territory. We blockaded Berlin. We wanted to show you that everything that came into Berlin came through socialist territory.
Illegal and immoral.
Not at all illegal. There was nothing written on paper giving the West access to Berlin. Certainly nothing written down guaranteeing commercial civilian traffic to Berlin. Those are our roads, our rails, our waterways.
The blockade was illegal. We're in Berlin not through your grace, but because we shared equally in the victory over Hitler's Germany. We don't need anything written down to prove the right of access, but most of all, it was immoral. You used the blockade and threatened to starve 2 million people because you didn't like our economic reforms. We were very close to war, my friend. Some of us wanted to take you to the international court, but that would have been useless. Others wanted to push an armored train through, but that certainly would have been war. We started an airlift by flying milk from West Germany to West Berlin. When we discovered that blockaded Berlin could be resupplied, we assembled cargo planes from all over the world and began to fly them into Tempelhof. At the peak of the airlift, we were able to put a plane a minute into Berlin. At the end of the airlift, the Berliners were eating better than before the planes came in.
You Americans are always very proud of your airlift. You talk of it as if it were a military victory. If it's a victory, we share in it. because the airlift could not have succeeded in the bad weather without radar equipment and ground-controlled landings. If we wanted to commit a hostile act, we could have jammed your radar sets. You never would have gotten in during winter if we had done so. It was only the restraint of the Soviet Union that kept us from going to war. We blockaded Berlin because we wanted to teach you that Berlin was in the Soviet economic sector. When we felt that you had learned your lesson, we lifted the blockade.
Oh, come now. You lifted the blockade because the blockade united the West against you. You lifted the blockade because we had won a victory. It had finally penetrated your mind that not only was the blockade ineffective, but we had captured the minds of millions of people who until now were undecided. The airlift split Germany even farther apart. In West Germany, free elections were held. Konrad Adenauer became chancellor.
And we held socialist elections in East Germany.
A little difference in the way your elections were held.
The German Democratic Republic was born. Walter Ulbricht became the chief authority. Both sides recognized realistically that Germany could not become unified. Although for bargaining purposes you have never recognized our Germans, you must now admit there are two Germanys. Our Germans and your Germans. If you would only recognize there are two countries here, there wouldn't be a Berlin crisis.
But is East Germany a country? Is it really a sovereign state controlling its own affairs? Let's look. Almost the first thing Herr Ulbricht did was strengthen the border, put up more barbed wire and control towers.
Yes, for the purpose of keeping your spies and saboteurs out of East Germany.
Then this sovereign state of East Germany began to take on a Russian look. Torchlight parades and youth rallies that are a mixture of Hitlerism and communism. Parades that echo communist parades all over the world. Peace rallies that recall the Nazi youth meetings of the 1930s.
My friend, you propagandize your Germans your way. We'll propagandize our Germans our way.
Originally, Ulbricht's goal was to milk East Germany dry, sending raw materials and finished goods to Russia. The industrial goals were set in Moscow.
What you mean is that East Germany is a socialist country, and I agree. I could just as easily prove that West Germany is the economic vassal of America.
As early as 1945, in violation of Potsdam, you began to build this East German army. At first, you disguised this army as a police force. In 1949, before there was a single German soldier in West Germany, the East Germans had 50,000 men under arms, training with Soviet tanks. The present East German army numbers some 75,000 combat-ready troops. In 1956, part of the police force came out in the open, complete with jackboots and all. German goose-step and Russian helmet notwithstanding, the East German army and police forces are considered politically unreliable. So you've backed them up with 400,000 Russian soldiers garrisoned in East Germany.
I would like to ask the size of the West German army, and how many Allied soldiers are stationed in West Germany.
The point is East Germany a sovereign state, controlling its own internal and external affairs? In 1953, as a protest against impossible production demands and low wages, some 300 workers struck in East Berlin. Suddenly, the East Berliners, who had no means of protesting against their government, came into the streets. They were joined throughout East Germany. Dissent had finally found a way to express itself.
These people had been inflamed by Western propaganda. For once, your CIA had been effective. You had subverted these people.
That's still not the point. The police of the so-called sovereign state of East Germany were unable to stop the riot. Secretly, many police joined the rioters. It was apparent that the East German government was unable to control its citizens. And in this moment of revolution, who decided the internal security of East Germany? Whose was the government that put down the East German riots? Soviet tanks, speaking for the Soviet government. The East asks the West to recognize two sovereign German governments. But everyone, including you, knows that East Germany is a mask behind which the Soviet government and the Red Army operate.
Let's talk about the West German Army. That force which next year will be larger than any other NATO force. Rearmed by you Americans. Trained by you Americans. And what is the West German Army asking for? The atomic bomb. It already has the weapons to carry the bomb. My friend, let us put aside all other arguments, legal, zonal, international. Let me say in the name of the Soviet Union, who suffered 20 million casualties from the hands of the Germans in World War II, that we are afraid of the West German Army armed with the atomic bomb. We think you're going to give the bomb to the West Germans, either you through NATO or the French with their new bomb and their new idea of European grandeur. We want a Berlin solution now, before these Germans have the bomb.
The West German Army does not have the bomb, and its very existence is the result of the continuous pressure that you've put against us. Army against army. The Russian fear of a nuclear-armed West Germany, our fear of Soviet rockets, their fear of massive retaliation. Army against army. This is the way the world ends. The Soviets are using both military threats and their version of history to force a solution to the Berlin problem. On the basis of might and imagined right, Khrushchev is proposing a peace treaty. If it were possible to sign a single peace treaty with all Germany, now, he says, is the time to do it. But there are two Germanys. So he says we must sign two peace treaties, one with East Germany, one with West Germany. These peace treaties would be signed with either state by all the countries who fought Germany in World War II. He's also proposing that West Berlin must be converted into a demilitarized free city. The occupation rights of the West will be terminated with the signing of this treaty with the East Germans. Khrushchev says that if the West does not agree to sign with either German state, he'll sign his East German peace treaty anyway. And if the West wants to remain in Berlin, it will have to negotiate occupation rights and access to the city with the sovereign state of East Germany. In short, if we want to go to Berlin, we'll have to get our ticket punched by the East Germans.
A Berlin subway ticket. The cost is just 35 pfennig. But this ticket has worried the communists more than the whole West German army. It's worried them so much, in fact, that they have cut the subway and elevated line from East to West Berlin. The end of that line and the place from where you could transfer out to the West, that place was here, Marienfeld, the reception center for refugees. Here, for 3 million refugees in the past 15 years, was where the West began. What is the East Germany from which these people come? Some time ago, my cameraman, Jerry Schwarzkopf, visited East Germany. I should tell you that Jerry is a West German citizen. Don't be confused by his excellent English. He's spent some time in the United States and perhaps a little too much time with CBS News correspondents.
I'm not a correspondent. I'm a cameraman. Some time ago, I applied for permission to shoot in East Germany. I waited a few months, and then we got the okay. Of course, I should say immediately that we had a communist guide at our elbow most of the time.
East Germany is right on the other side of the sign. The whole Brandenburg Gate is in the Soviet sector.
There was no barbed wire around it then. I thought of that line of Abe Lincoln's. This country can't exist half slave and half free. When I went through, it was no trick to get into East Berlin. Even now, a West German like me gets checked, but still gets through. Stalinallee is the local tourist trap. But they don't sell things here. They sell ideas. Peace treaty and general disarmament. Socialism will win. Hard sell. For smaller matters, to my West German eye, the clothes they have no style, and they're badly made. They let us photograph anything we wanted. They said they had nothing to hide. Except that when this shot was made, 2 members of our crew were arrested. We panned left, and one of these buildings shouldn't have been filmed. I still don't know which one or why not. It took us 6 hours to talk them out of it. They didn't like us filming these women lined up for oranges and butter. Sometimes they ration some foods and sometimes they're accused. The guide we had with us let us shoot, but said it was unfair. The same goods were on sale in the government stores and nobody had to wait. Why didn't we go around the corner and shoot some film of that? So we did. Around the corner, 50 miles away in Stalinstadt. Stalin City. It sounds as awful in German as it does in English. There's the supermarket, run by the communist government like your American PXs. They were delighted to see us because they said this would show that nobody in East Germany is starving. I suppose they're right. And these goods do come from all around the world. Russia, Poland, Hungarian with a French accent, Chinese. I never knew there were Chinese pineapples. What they don't say is how dependent they are on industrial trade with West Germany. During the last Berlin crisis, we West Germans threatened to cut off trade with them, and they backed down. There were other reasons too, of course. They're just scratching Stalinstadt out of nothing, according to plan. It looks like a lot of those after-the-war cities we built in West Germany, raw and new. But there's a difference. I don't think women should do heavy work, but the East Germans do. There's a manpower shortage. Anyway, you see women working all through the Soviet Empire. They pick the strong and well-fed ladies for heavy work. They have an agricultural problem and they admit it. This is a collective farm we visited. A collective farm is where all the farmers pool their land so they can work it more efficiently. Separating a European peasant from his land isn't easy, then telling him how hard he is to work and what he is to grow. Of course, some people just don't like to work on farms. By collectivizing, they can use modern machinery. They say small farms are inefficient. They're being pushed to produce more because Russia wants East Germany to catch up with West Germany, and they're 75% there. We went inside a farmer's house. You may not like the styles, but everything you need for comfortable living is there. Of course, they picked the farmhouse we could film. Stalinstadt is right on the Oder River. On the other side of the river used to be Germany. Now everybody calls it Poland. The other side of the Oder was just supposed to be Polish-occupied Germany, but they kicked all the Germans out. Russia says that's Poland over there. When you're really east in East Germany, there are a lot of things missing. Few cars on the streets. Cars are mostly for government or communist officials only. Some children, but not as many in proportion. The young parents have taken their children to the West. Other things missing: doctors, lawyers, professional men, and non-communist intellectuals. Much of the brain power flowed west a long time ago. Still no cars. The communists are still permitting church services. They wanted to show us they hadn't stopped people from going to church. Well-fed, warmly dressed East Germans worshipping. What do these people believe? Well, one thing they don't believe is that they are East Germans. They still don't believe that East Germany is a nation. These people think of themselves as Germans and Christians. Historically, that ties them to Europe. Nothing ties them to the East and to Moscow now, but the Red Army. Of course, that could change. On Easter Sunday, we were invited to a communist ceremony. Easter Sunday, and instead of the traditional church confirmation, the communists had their own ritual. The choir sang the East German anthem. The children filed in, wearing their Sunday best. The sermon, or lecture, was all about how communism was spiritual and capitalism was materialistic. The kids came up and recited a pledge to socialism. They received secular benediction or communist confirmation, or whatever words you want. It was a crazy ceremony to me, but I suppose it got through to some of them. I wondered how dedicated these people really were. I wondered how many of these people were thinking about going west to Marienfelde. I remember that line of Lincoln: you can fool some of the people all of the time, and all of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time. That's the subway that used to come looping out of the East Zone into West Berlin. This is no longer the way out. But the East Germans will find a way out. They'll swim or break through the barrier somehow.
Today, they are no longer coming by subway in the thousands, but by small handsful, by swimming canals, by burrowing through barbed wire. Marienfelde is still busy processing the final surge of human beings through the closing gap, but it may soon become a ghost town. Last Saturday, just before the boom fell, our electronic cameras were here to record the last mass flight of refugees. This is the picture that had to be erased, for Marienfelde was where the communists lost their case. These were not the thin, shabby, displaced persons usually associated with the word refugees. Though they did not come with much, they showed no signs of starvation. Look at them. Three out of 4 were less than 45 years old. Over the last 7 years, some 16,000 teachers, 12,000 students, 5,000 doctors and chemists, 700 lawyers have all come across. About 4 million Germans have come over altogether, through Marienfelde and through other points. The best brain power, the good workers, just the people East Germany needs most. East Germany trained them, West Germany got them. Why did they come? The cliche is to choose freedom. And that's probably true. But freedom means little things as well as big ones. For days, we filmed the answer to a single question. That question is, why did you leave East Germany?
Ja, ich war zuletzt in Leipzig. Und
my last stop was Leipzig.
ich muss sagen, dass die
And I must say,
Lebensmittellage
the conditions
dort sehr
there
angespannt war,
were very tense.
dass man
We
immer
could
wieder
see
Schlangen
people
sehen konnte,
standing in line
vor allen Dingen nach
to buy vegetables
Gemüse und nach
and
Frühkartoffeln,
potatoes,
aber auch zum Beispiel
but
Milch
also milk
und,
and butter was
Butter
very hard to
waren
come
nur
by.
schwer zu haben und es herrschte überall
There was an
eine
undercurrent of
Verärgerung
anger everywhere
wegen dieser
because of the
fehlenden
shortage.
My husband is a technician, and he had another 6 months of studying to do when they stopped his studies. He was supposed to join the army in the Democratic Republic. They even offered him a very influential position, but he would have had to join the Communist Party, which he didn't want to do.
Well, for the simple reason that I did not want to let myself be buried at the age of 30. And if you look at the developments around there, that is what would happen. We had an apartment in a new building which was just across the street from the state security police. And that, of course, made everything much easier for them. Therefore, we were limited as to what visitors we could receive and what we could do in our homes. That sort of thing gets to be a burden after a while until you can't put up with it anymore.
Well, at the moment, I would say that the situation is about as bad as it can get. Nobody trusts anybody else anymore, and when you open your mouth, you're really frightened that someone will inform on you. It is really dreadful. And we want to live a Christian life, and I don't want to send my children to school over there.
About the present living conditions, I can only say that during the past few years, everything had deteriorated tremendously. It is ridiculous that in the summer, potatoes should still be rationed, and that people should still have to stand in line for hours to get them.
The shoes we get are made of imitation leather, and they're made very badly, and you can only wear them 2 or 3 times before you have to take them to the shoemaker to be fixed.
Then spare parts for motorcycles, bicycles, and so on are unobtainable. Bicycles are absolutely out of the question. If you want one, or a television set for that matter, you must apply 3 or 4 years in advance, which does not mean that you can be sure of getting it either. The fact of the matter is that there is shortage of butter and all other necessary foods. As a rule, you can't even get fruit at all. And if at times it is available, it sells for enormous prices. As for shoes and textiles, you meet the same difficulties because what is offered is very bad. Well, because as time goes by, things are getting progressively worse over there. I mean, we have endured it for many years. We have worked hard and put in a great deal of effort toward making progress. But we could see no results. Well, you have to go on, and there's just no way of getting ahead over there. The prices are going up constantly, and every time you ask why, they tell you the quality of the merchandise has improved. They gave me 25 years for espionage, 25 years for anti-Soviet propaganda, and 3 years for illegal crossing of the border. This amounted to 53 years, but they cut it down to only 25 years. However, they did make the point that they would actually have given me the death sentence had it not been eliminated in the Soviet Union at that time.
The real problem to Khrushchev has always been to close the hole in the Iron Curtain. The whole communist world needed the Berlin escape hatch closed, but mostly East Germany, which had the gap in its very center. What can we do? We who claim not only our right to come to Berlin, but our and every Berliner's right to circulate freely within the city. President Kennedy's call for partial mobilization shows that we take the whole Berlin issue seriously, but can we use force because the communists pen in the people under their rule? Before military action, there are economic steps we can take, like an economic blockade or a trade boycott. But there are signs that we will not invoke these now either. There is one weapon, not truly ours, a bomb of untested power, although it has exploded before, the first time 8 years ago, right on the other side of that Brandenburg Gate. That weapon is the East German people themselves, the first people in history to take up arms against their communist leaders. For many of them, life was possible only so long as the hole remained in the Iron Curtain, even if they didn't come through it immediately. Since last Sunday, when the hole was closed, they have swum canals and burrowed through ruins and crept under barbed wire, still trying to escape. The communist fear of what else these people will do is shown by the massive display of armed power that has turned East Berlin into an occupied city. In this atomic age, it is a curious thing that in the end, the greatest weapon that evades control and calculation is still the people and their resistance to tyranny. Here in Berlin, two definitions of man's fate and man's faith are colliding. We are not sounding any summons for them to do battle, for we too fear the consequences if people should rise up out of control, threatening to drag big powers into war. We have today no policy of rolling back the Iron Curtain if we ever had one. But today, as in 1953, as in 1956, it is the people behind the Iron Curtain who have a policy of rolling forward. The yearning for freedom seems greater than the cautions of statesmen. In the end, there are two revolutions in conflict, the communist revolution and ours, and here in Germany, of all places.
One, 2, 3, 4. Count to 10 and open the door.
Oh, that's a good one.
Electric eye does everything for you.
Can I try it?
Go ahead. It's easy.
1, 2, 3, 4. Count to 10 and open the door.
I did it, and look how sharp it is.
It's always sharp. You never have to focus it.
I bet I could do it too.
Sure you can. Just aim and push the buttons.
1, 2, 3, 4. Count to 10 and open the door. Anyone can take perfect pictures with the new Polaroid 10-second automatic camera. No focusing, no settings in any light.
Charges and countercharges go back and forth. Both sides back their charges with military preparations. But it's obvious that, for today at least, both sides would rather bargain than bomb. This is the geographical division of Germany today. There are some people in the West who say that the West should stand pat, that any negotiations or change is by definition a sign of weakness on our part. Germany cut up like this, they say, is good enough to live with. They say we are not having a Berlin crisis, Khrushchev is. The Soviets are in trouble with decay and revolt in their East German state, and with Khrushchev's need to remain the leader of world communism. Khrushchev won't fight for Berlin, they say. Stand pat, or give him a concession to save his face, and nothing will happen. But there are others who say that though our position in West Berlin is morally strong, it is geographically and legally weak. Unless we can strengthen it, it will be a constant source of danger. Hence, our willingness to negotiate. What are Khrushchev's proposals? For it was these proposals that set off the crisis in Berlin. In essence, he says there are two Germanys. A capitalist Germany that can remain capitalist for all he cares, and a socialist Germany that must stay communist. And there is Berlin, a tenuous link, a half-open gateway, a bone in the throat. Face the facts, he says. It's 16 years after the war, and it's time for a treaty. 2 treaties, if you like, one with each Germany. He says he's going to sign with his Germans before the end of the year, and he invites us to sign too. Look what we'll get if we sign with East Germany. In the peace treaty itself, he, Mr. Khrushchev, will see to it that we get a written guarantee of access to West Berlin. As for Berlin, if we sign with East Germany, once again, we'll have a written guarantee on West Berlin. West Berlin becomes a free city belonging to nobody. It can retain its way of life. It can stay a decadent capitalist city if it wants. And for a guarantee, the West will be permitted to keep token forces in West Berlin, or the United Nations can put troops in West Berlin. We get all that, if it's anything at all, if we sign a peace treaty with the East Germans. If we don't sign with the East Germans, Khrushchev is going to sign, he says, anyway. That, in the communist view, officially ends World War II, and that makes East Germany a sovereign state. By definition, a sovereign state controls its borders and its airspace. And if anyone wants to go to the free city of West Berlin, he'll have to ask the East Germans to punch his tickets. That, leaving out a few grace notes, is the official Soviet proposal. It's accompanied by threats of war and protestations of peace, and to many people in the West, it's just a case of heads I win, tails you lose. Let's back up and see why. This last proposal that somehow or other we'll have to ask the East Germans for the right to go to Berlin hardly commends itself to us. We claim we already have that right. We may not have it on paper in a form that all lawyers would like, but we have it. Why should this right to control access end up in the hands of the East Germans? It's our position that the Russians, by solemn four-power agreement, share responsibility for Berlin. They cannot unilaterally transfer what they jointly agreed to maintain. If the Soviet Union goes ahead and signs a peace treaty with the East Germans anyway, we claim it's like a man shaking hands with himself. Now, what are our official proposals? We've been proposing the same thing since 1945, and we say, let's have free elections throughout all of Germany. Let the people choose their system of government. Let them negotiate their border with Poland. Once Germany is unified, then we can sign a peace treaty. And a unified Germany removes the problem of Berlin because it would become just another city. That, again leaving out a few grace notes, is the Western position. The Soviets say, look at the facts. There are 2 Germanys, and there always will be. A socialist Germany, East is East, and a capitalist Germany, West is West. As a matter of fact, say the Soviets, you really don't want to take down the barriers in Germany in spite of what you say. All Europe is afraid of a united Germany. 3 times in the last 99 years, a united Germany has exploded into war against Europe. That's why they say we won't even discuss a unified Germany with you. The long-term issue is, are those checkpoints here permanently or temporarily? The West says they're temporary. The Soviets say they're permanent. But it's the short term, perhaps the very short term, which concerns us now. The short-term issue is how, even with the checkpoints still there, we can ensure the continued existence of a free West Berlin 110 miles deep into the communist world. This is what the big 3 Western foreign ministers were talking about in Paris last week. I covered that conference. We are prepared to negotiate. But the foreign ministers discovered that the area of negotiations is desperately narrow. Here is one thing which is being talked about. This area right here, between the Oder-Neisse line and Germany's 1937 borders. The Poles have that now. There are almost no Germans there. The West, though, has never formally recognized it as Polish. It has been suggested that we trade recognition of the Oder-Neisse line against a guarantee acceptable to lawyers that we'll have free access forever to Berlin. But no one knows what Khrushchev would give for recognition of the Oder-Neisse line. Moreover, the West Germans wouldn't like the deal, nor would many politicians in America. There is, in addition, some reason to believe that the Soviets are extremely anxious to have their East German regime recognized by the West, if not de jure through the signing of a formal treaty, at least de facto in day-to-day arrangements. Khrushchev needs this to draw the line clearly between his world and ours, between the East and the West, right here in Helmstedt. Many in the West argue that such de facto recognition is no more than accepting a situation we already tacitly recognize, and that we would be conceding nothing important. But once again, no one knows what Khrushchev would be willing to give up for even de facto recognition of East Germany. We're not going to recognize East Germany formally as a state. There are some communist Germans down there and some Russian soldiers, but there isn't any independent East German government. Well, where are we in the Berlin crisis? First of all, the crisis isn't all in Berlin. It's here in Helmstedt. It revolves around the fact of a divided Germany. These barriers don't look like much, but they divide Germany. Khrushchev is asking us to sign a peace treaty to make them permanent, that they will divide Europe, right here, along this Helmstedt line. All of Khrushchev's proposals depend upon our endorsement of a divided Germany as a step toward freezing the frontiers of a divided world. In this light, the crisis in Berlin is a symptom, not the cause. The crisis is real enough, but it's part of the larger East-West confrontation. That is why this checkpoint and Berlin are regarded by great nations as important enough to threaten nuclear war. There will be negotiations this fall. There are things that each side may be willing to trade for peace. That is the hope, that they will be found and that there will be no bombs and that the traffic will continue to flow through the woods here and on to West Berlin. But the issues are very large. Up the road in Berlin, it is a problem of two Germanys. Here in Helmstedt, it is a problem of two worlds.
This special report was brought to you by Polaroid Corporation, makers of the Polaroid Land Camera. The preceding pre-recorded program was produced under the supervision and control of CBS News. Route 66 will return next.